Hi, and welcome to the videos for section 1.5 for Math 126. This is the first of 3 videos. In section 1.5, we're now going to be looking at solving equations. So up until this point, it's all basically been expressions and simplifying. We haven't had an equal sign where we're trying to find x is equal to something or y is equal to something. Now we actually have equations, and we're going to try to find out what are the actual values for those variables. So first we're going to be looking at quadratic equations. And so a quadratic equation, and abbreviated QE, is an equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers. And a, of course, can't be 0, because if a is 0, what happens? Well, this first term goes away, and now it's not a quadratic equation. So quadratic means we're going to have an x squared term. One of the ways we can solve this, and we talked a little bit about this earlier when we were talking about domains, is we can use the zero property rule. So again, what the zero property rule says, that if we have sum A times sum B, if this equals 0, then A is equal to 0, or B is equal to 0, or both are equal to 0. So, let's look at an example. Let's say we want to solve the following equation: x squared plus 5x is equal to 24. So when we're solving these, we're always going to want to move everything to the left and have 0 on the right. That way we can utilize a zero property rule, because I don't have a 24 property rule. I don't have any rule that says, oh, if I set this equal to 24, A is 24, B is 24, or both. No, we don't have that. We have the zero property rule. So if I move that 24 over, if I subtract 24 from both sides, I get what? X squared plus 5x minus 24 is equal to 0. So this is one of my quadratic equations. It's in this form. And so to solve this, I want to use the zero property rule. But zero property rule says what? I need to have two things multiplied by each other. Here I just have addition and subtraction. So what do I have to do? I have to factor it. So again, you can see how everything we've been doing so far, we're only 5 sections in, but it's all building on each other. So really important that if there's any part or any section that you've struggled with so far, come and get some help or ask about it in class, because as you can see, if you have trouble with factoring, it's going to be an issue all semester. If you have trouble with zero property rule, it's going to be a problem all semester, because everything builds on it. So if we factor this, again, this is a single x here, so it's going to be x and x. 24, well, one of the factors of 24 is 8 and 3, which a combination will give us 5. And because we want plus, it's what? X plus 8, x minus 3. So now I have my a times b. A times b is 0. So that means x plus 8 is 0, or x minus 3 is 0. Solve each of these. So x is minus 8, and x is positive 3. So this would be my solution. If this is on the exam and you have the time, what can you do? Plug these back in. So let's do 3. It's a smaller number, a little easier for us. If I plug 3 in, I get 3 squared, which is 9. 3 times 5 is 15. 9 plus 15 is 24. So what I would suggest when you're checking your work, and so why did I go up to here and not up to here? Well, if I made the mistake at this point when I moved this 24 over, I might have gotten different numbers here, but if I plugged it into this equation, would have given me a true statement. But because I messed up my math, it's giving me wrong answers for my wrong equation. So always go back and plug it into the original. That way there's no chance that you screwed something up. So if let's say this came out to be a 0. Well, 0 plus 0 is not 24, so I know that I messed something up in here, and I can kind of try to backtrack to see where did I make a mistake. So always plug it back in. And same thing would work for 8. Plug in 8, you get 8 squared is 64. Negative 8, so 5 times negative 8 is minus 40. 60 minus 40 is 24. So again, you can always go back, check your work. So in this case here, we had a quadratic with 3 terms. We also have what's called a simple quadratic. So quadratic means I have an x squared term, but the difference here is that I don't have that middle term with just a single degree of x. I just have x squared is equal to some number c. So to solve this, if I want to get x by itself, what do I have to do? Well, I would have to take the square root of both sides, but you have to be careful here because when we take the square root, how do we get back to the original? Well, we would have to square it. Well, when we square it, it could be positive or negative and still give us a positive back. So when we have x squared is equal to c, what this means is that x is equal to plus or minus the square root of c. So for example, let's say x squared is 25. Well, that means what? X would have to be plus or minus the square root of 25, which is plus or minus 5. So if I plug this back in, plus 5, 5 squared is 25. But why do we have to account for that negative? Because negative 5 squared is also positive 25. And so I'm stressing to you here, don't forget, I should probably write this in red. In fact, I will. Don't forget when you have x squared is equal to some number, c is a constant. So when x squared is equal to some number, it's plus or minus the square root of that value. And I stress this because, again, I teach 127. We do a lot of stuff with radicals and roots in Math 127. And this is a mistake I see. People forget that there's that plus and minus aspect of it. So I don't want you to make that mistake. Last thing for the first video is completing the square. So we can complete the square to solve equations, quadratic equations. And we're going to use this primarily with a couple situations. One, if it's not a simple quadratic, we can't do it. And what if we can't factor it? So what if we had a trinomial that we just weren't able to factor? Well, one of the things we can do is complete the square. And there's basically 6 steps to this. The first one, move all the variables to one side, constants to the other. So what we're going to end up with that point is ax squared plus bx is equal to some value c. So if you remember that last example we did, we had, what was the x squared plus 5x is 24. So it would look of that form. Now, what is absolutely critical here is that a must be equal to 1. So when I did this, if I had whatever, let's say 3x squared plus 9x equals 6, I need this value in front of my x squared equal to 1. So what would I have to do? I would have to divide everything by whatever that value is, in this case by 3. So that's critical. A must be 1 before you do any of this complete the square process. Once we have that, second step, take half of b. Third step, square that value. Step 4, whatever we get from step 3, we add that value to both sides. So don't forget to do left and right. It's like a teeter-totter or a seesaw, depending where you grew up, I guess, and how old you are. So if I square it and I get 3, well, if I add 3 to this side, I also have to add 3 to the right side to keep my equation in balance. Step 5, factor the left side. And I'll show you a little trick that will make factoring easy. So if you're struggling with factoring still, you don't really have to factor it because you already have the numbers you need. So factor the left side. And then once you have that, then you can solve it. Because once we factored the left side, we're going to end up what's known as a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to get a simple quadratic back, and it will allow us to solve it. So let's look at an example. Let's say I want to solve the following quadratic. I have x squared minus 8x plus 13 is equal to 0. So in this case, I can't factor this. The only factors of 13 are 1 and 13, and that combination doesn't get me a negative 8. So I have to complete the square. So what I'm going to do is move that 13 over. So I subtract 13 from both sides, and I get what? X squared minus 8x equals negative 13. So that was step 1. My a is already 1, so I'm okay there. So now, step 2, take half of b. So I'm going to put my work over on the side here so that I can keep track of it, so if something doesn't work out later, I can kind of go back and see did I mess something up. So my b is what? Well, my b is negative 8. So if there's a minus sign there, you have to account for that minus sign. So b is negative 8. Take half of b. So 1/2 of b, negative 8 divided by 2, is negative 4. So that was step 2. Step 3, square that value. So 1/2 of b squared is negative 4 squared, which is 16. And that's always going to give you a positive value, right? Because we're squaring it. So whether that value is positive or negative, as soon as we square it, it becomes positive. Now, so that was step 3. Now step 4, we add it to both sides. So I add 16 here, and I add 16 there. Factor the left side, and I guess simplify the right. But if I have to factor this, so here's our trick. This guy, as I said, it's what's called a perfect square trinomial. So the piece that goes inside this parenthesis is going to be the same value. And in this case, it's what? X minus 4, x minus 4. If you FOIL this out, you get what? Positive 16 minus 4 is minus 8. I didn't even have to think about this. Why? Because I already have minus 4. Where do I have minus 4? Right here. So whatever half of b is, that's going to go into this perfect square trinomial. And this guy, x minus 4 times x minus 4 is what? Well, it's x minus 4 squared. So if I have 3 times 3, I can say that's 3 squared. If I have x times x, I can say that's x squared. If I have x minus 4 times x minus 4, that's x minus 4 squared. And again, when I'm working these problems, I won't even do this step. I'll go right to here because I know it's going to end up a square, and it's always going to be this value for 1/2 of b goes inside of those parentheses. And now here, what do I have on the right? Negative 13 plus 6 is positive 3. So now what do I have? Now I have a simple quadratic. So to solve that, this would be what? It'd be what's underneath here, x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of what's on this side, which is 3. So because I have this plus or minus, I actually have two equations. I have what? I have x minus 4 is plus square root of 3, and x minus 4 is negative square root of 3. So to get x by itself, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So that gives me what? X is equal to 4 plus the square root of 3. And x is equal to 4 minus the square root of 3. And so sometimes you may see this just written as x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 3. So we just add 4 here, add 4 to this side, and it gives us 4 plus or minus the square root of 3. So depending on if WebAssign for your homework, if they want you to split it up, you would have to split it into 2 pieces. If on an exam you just write 4 plus or minus square root of 3, fine, 100%. So that's it for video 1. Introduction to quadratic equations, zero property rule, completing the square. So come on back and we'll look at video 2.